What's up, you guys? Jalen Hawk here, as always, bringing weekly anime and manga reviews, and I'm here with another video. So, I have not uploaded in a while, and I promise I will make a video or a live stream explaining everything that's been going on. I've just been very busy. Stuff going on in my personal life, mainly school life stuff. It's just been a really hectic where I was stressed out, and I kind of just needed a break, as well as the fact that I also didn't really have any time to make any videos in the meantime. So I will make another video or a live stream explaining everything. So yeah, besides that, I kind of wanted to make this video just looking back at the Tokyo Ghoul series and talking about it, because I wanted to make another TG video at some point. TG was a really big part of my life, surprisingly enough. It's mainly when it comes to this YouTube channel and interacting with lots of different people, where even though TG kind of ended off a little bit on a sour note for me, I still do have a very big soft spot for it, just because of everything that's happened. And there were a lot of good moments in TG, despite the ending being really, really lackluster and disappointing. And obviously, Suishida has come out and stated like a lot of different things when it comes to that, like in the final volume, with his thank you letter, as well as even on Twitter. And I can get into that in a separate video. But as for now, I kind of want to look back at Tokyo Ghoul Part 1, and then I'll make a sequel video to this at some point in the future. I can't really promise when, looking at Tokyo Ghoul Re. Now, going into this, I've stated this a couple of times, and I've even made a video where I kind of brought this up. I've always liked Tokyo Ghoul Part 1 more than I have Re. Now, that isn't to say that I dislike Re, because I don't. There are some aspects of Re that I don't like, where things did become a little bit more overly complicated, or even a little bit convenient for the overall narrative. I always have felt like that Tokyo Ghoul Part 1 is almost a perfect story. Now, it isn't good enough to the point where you can end it perfectly at that point in the story. I don't think it works well enough to do that. It does definitely hinge a little bit on some type of sequel, only because there are a lot of leftover plot points that haven't been addressed yet, like who is the One-Eyed King, and a lot of mysteries when it comes to Eto and the fates of certain characters like Yoshimura, Kaneki, Irimi, and Koma, and other different characters where you're not entirely sure where exactly their arcs would lead. And obviously, we do know that we find out the outcomes for a lot of these different characters in Re, but I thought Tokyo Ghoul Part 1 was significantly better told of the story, and even though it did hinge a little bit more on a sequel, I don't think it necessarily hinged too much to the point where like the story can be looked at as a separate entity entirely. And that's kind of one of the main reasons why when I do categorize TG, usually on like tier lists and stuff, and even though it is in pair with Re, I feel like you can rate both series separately and still have good opinions on both. So yeah. Now, when it comes to Tokyo Ghoul, one of the reasons why I've always just kind of preferred Tokyo Ghoul over Tokyo Ghoul Re is just because of the fact that it's a more character-driven story than a story-driven story, if that makes any sense. Because narratively, there's usually two different types of stories. You have ones that are focused entirely on the characters, and the characters are the ones who drive the story forward, and it's their interactions that pushes certain events to happen in the story. And then you have story-driven stories, where, or narrative-driven, where because of the way how the plot is structured, certain events would happen regardless, even if the interactions of the characters didn't necessarily happen, where it was kind of bound to happen eventually. For example, Tokyo Ghoul Re, I would say, is a lot more story-driven, simply because of the fact that it kind of ranges more out of the scope of just being centered around Kaneki, whereas Part 1 is a lot more heavily focused on Kaneki, even though there are characters that are prominent, that have very big roles in the story, or even if they don't show up a lot, they still have a pretty big impact, like Mado and Hide, where they both have very big impacts on certain characters in the story. Hide more on Kaneki, and Mado more on Amon, and even Akira, and even Toka to an extent, because of Toka and Hinami, were because of what he did to them, kind of caused their mentalities to slowly change a lot more and go down different directions, where Toka became a lot more human-like, and Hinami kind of forced herself a little bit more deeper into the ghoul world, as well as like several other different things. I've kind of addressed that on my Hinami videos in the past. But aside from that, I've liked the character-driven story a little bit more when it comes to Tokyo Ghoul Part 1, mainly due to the fact that I feel like because of it being character-driven, it feels a lot more personal because we're experiencing the ghoul world and Kaneki's change with him. We're seeing him change from the subtle aspects of the way how his speech slowly changes, the way how his nature overall changes, and even the way how he kind of showcases himself compared to different people. Where with Hinami, I've always brought this up, that I felt like that with Hinami, Kaneki's personality never really changed too much. He kind of always stayed true to himself in the way that he's always been when he's around Hinami. Whereas in the case with Tsukiyama, he's always presenting himself as very dominant, very alpha, like a leader, like how a leader should be. And then even in the case with Toka, even though he tries to be true to himself, at the same time he is lying, and he doesn't really want to show Toka the person that he's become. Not to like really go into like a romantic aspect when it comes to that, because that might have came off a little bit weird, but I just liked the way how Kaneki's transformation was dealt with in TG TG Part 1, because it didn't feel necessarily really forced, like things were getting forced upon him. It felt very natural and very progressive, whereas in Re, not to really like slap Re around, because Re I think is really a good story, some aspects when it comes to Kaneki's character don't necessarily feel as gradual as they should have been. For example, in the very end of TG Re, when Kaneki's fighting against Furuta, you have this really big moment where Kaneki's like, I'm going to fight for all the people that I care about and all my friends, and I'm going to be the one to save the world and all this stuff. And it's just kind of like, well, I can see why you would eventually come to that conclusion eventually, but I feel like you haven't gone through enough yet, which sounds really weird, especially like with, well, Tokyo Ghoul isn't necessarily like a super long series compared to others, but like how long Kaneki's journey has been, you'd think that it would make sense for him eventually to arrive at that conclusion. But when you get into that arc in the beginning, that Kaneki still has the mentality where it's kind of like, oh, I just kind of want to protect the people that I care about, not necessarily the overall world. But once he takes that giant leap to the world, it's kind of like, really? I don't know if I really believe that. But either way, going back to what I was saying before, another aspect of Tokyo Ghoul Part 1 that I really did enjoy was probably the relationship between Kaneki and Amon. Because when it comes to Kaneki and Amon's relationship, they have one of the best chemistries between any character in the entirety of the series. Obviously, there's a lot of other really good interactions in the series, like the relationship between Amon, Akira, and Takizawa, or Kaneki and Hide, or Kaneki and Hinami, or Kaneki and Toka. Like, there's a lot of really good interactions, or even Uri and the other Quink Squad members. There's a lot of really good interactions in TG's story, but none of them, well, even though all of them are different in their own right, like how pure the relationship between Kaneki and Hide is, or even Kaneki and Hinami is, Kaneki and Amon I really like because they're two sides of the same coin, and they're both going down these really different paths, but eventually, obviously by the time of Re, but you can kind of see that acceptance by the time of the end of Part 1, they eventually end up colliding, and each time they end up fighting, all three times that they did back in their first encounter during the Hinami arc, their second encounter during the Kano's Lab raid, and then the final one during the Anteku raid. It's nice to really see how much all these characters changed, where their mentalities of one another were very opposing throughout the course of the story, and seeing the way how Amon came to realize Kaneki wasn't that bad of a person, or isn't really a bad person in general, was nice to see, even though he didn't know that much about him. It was just mainly seeing all the things that he's done, and the way how he's interacted with different people, or even the way how he's treated the people around him is just really cool. And even though people give the Tokyo Ghoul Route A anime, like, flack all the time, and I've always brought up the fact that I feel like Tokyo Ghoul Route A isn't nearly as bad as people make it out to be. I would say that the re-anime is definitely worse. More season 2 than season 1. Season 1 I think is okay, but or the first core is better than the second core, whatever. I felt like that the Route A anime actually did a really good job at presenting the relationship between Kaneki versus Amon, at least when it comes to the final fight, because I feel like them acknowledging each other by learning each other's names, as well as seeing the way how, even though they're fighting to the death clearly, they don't really want to kill each other, and they're hoping that by the time this fight is over, even though one of them is probably not going to be able to stand any longer, that they will be able to hold out long enough that they won't end up dying. And you even have that really great moment where Amon, he loses his arm. Like, his arm is, like, torn from him because of Kaneki's attack, and obviously Kaneki has a giant hole in his stomach. You have where, when the other investigators find him, like, bleeding out on the ground, he's like, yeah, I can't die here because that will make him a murderer. It's nice to just see that the overall character arc of Amon and Kaneki not necessarily has come to a complete close, but has been... they've interacted enough where they understand each other in the fact that they don't want to cause any more harm than necessary. It's just that they're on these polar opposite paths for so long that they're kind of forced to have to fight each other, despite them realizing that the overall grand scheme of the world is wrong, and there are some things that need to be changed from it, which was kind of one of the reasons why I was really disappointed at the fact that they kind of implied that Amon wasn't really having that big of a role when it comes to the grand scheme of changing the Tokyo Ghoul world, aside from just him fighting before the 6-year time skip. That kind of annoyed me, because I'm just like, well, I feel like Amon would be one of the bigger advocates alongside of Kaneki and Hide, where Kaneki's like spending his life like helping fix everything to kind of atone for everything that he's done as Dragon, even though that wasn't really his fault. And Hide's being like an advocate, actually going around talking to people about the Ghoul and Human Restoration Act. I thought that Amon would play a way bigger role, but he didn't. But I'll probably talk a little bit more about that when I make my video about TG Re. But Tokyo Ghoul Part 1, I thought was a really good story. I also like the change of perspectives a lot, because Tokyo Ghoul Part 1 story switches mainly between the perspectives of Kaneki, Toka, and Amon, where the first half of the story, even though, well, I wouldn't say like the first half, like up till volume, well, I guess that is the first half, up until like about volume 6 or 7, when Kaneki becomes white-haired. For the most part, the main protagonist of the story, even though Kaneki is there, I would say Toka's a little bit more in the limelight than Kaneki is. And we get to see her change. And I like the fact that, like how Kaneki and Amon go on opposite journeys, Toka and Kaneki do as well, where Kaneki becomes a lot more ghoul-like by the end of the story, and Toka becomes a lot more human-like. And they kind of end up in each other's shoes, where Kaneki started off in the story being a college student that was just kind of trying to live a little normal life, in a little bit depressing of a life, but he was just trying to live his life. And you have where Toka ends up at the very end, where she is trying to get into a college and live her life. It's not really clear if she did go to college or not. I'm assuming she didn't, because she ended up running the cafe, but either way, she was living a very human lifestyle, where she started off kind of like, almost like a ghoul street thug. Not necessarily at the very beginning of the TG story, but more a little bit before that, like back when Ayato was still around and living with her. And you have where Kaneki by the very end, even though he is fighting for the side that he believes in, which is Onteku, he went down a pretty sour path that ended up leading to his quote-unquote supposed demise, which obviously we know just ended up causing him to transition to Heise. So I don't really want to harp on this too long, because I've made a lot of videos about stuff like this, and you guys obviously already know the TG story, but I just kind of want to gradually swing back into the way of things, talk about Tokyo Ghoul again, because I do love Tokyo Ghoul quite a bit, and probably start making more videos on it. I'll probably still make videos about Black Clover here and there, but I would also like to see your guys' thoughts on what other videos you guys would want for me to make in the future, and what other series. I was thinking about talking about quintuplets once I catch up to it, but I haven't really decided yet. Either way, thanks for watching. Better comment, rate, subscribe as always. I love you all. Jalen Hawk signing out. See you guys. Bye.